out. I apologize, members. We are doing a hybrid hearing. I'll start over. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. This is the Housing, Finance, and Policy Committee hearing for December 6th.
I can't hear you, sir.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, we lost you.
Lost me.
There you are.
Huh. Okay, I think we're good. So December 6th, 10:16, we'll call to order the Housing, Finance, and Policy Committee. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and once again apologizing for the technical issues here at the office complex for the Senate. Can everybody still hear us fine? Okay, sorry, we're getting error messages on the screen. So members, today we have three subjects that we'd like to talk about. One is an update on the rent help program, and then talk about housing infrastructure bonds, and then third, the rent control that passed this last November. And members, anybody have any questions about technology or the topics for the day before we go to the commissioner? Okay, I'm not seeing any, no hands up. So Commissioner, thank you so much for joining us. We'll send it to Commissioner Ho. The first subject will be rent help.
Thank you, Chairman Draheim. It's good to be back with you. I was going to say in person, hybrid. I guess we're going to have a whole new vocabulary for how we do this. A lot has happened since we had a hearing in early July. I also just want to note it's been very nice to be able to be with some of you in your districts during the interim. And I also just want to give a special welcome home to Senator Duckworth. Thank you for your service on your most recent deployment, and congratulations on being home for the birth of your child. I'm sure that was a huge deal for your whole family, so welcome home. Thank you. I just want to start by noting that 2021 has been an extraordinary year. It's been important, it's been big, and it's been hard. You know, even as we've focused so much energy on the one-time federal assistance, you know, it's been amazing to me that the core functions of Minnesota Housing have been able to continue as they have, even in our 21st month of teleworking. And I just kind of remain mindful of the fact that we had such significant housing challenges before COVID. And still here in December of 2021, it still seems like we're faced with so many uncertainties as we close out the year. So just want to acknowledge that. I also I want to thank you all for caring so deeply about housing stability, housing affordability, and the long-term needs of Minnesotans as we try to get housing right here. As requested, I've prepared material on three things: rent help MN, the local rent control and stabilization ballot measures, and an update on the housing infrastructure bonds and the federal actions that might trigger their contingencies. Next slide, Ryan, please. I'm here with Ryan Baumtraub, my Assistant Commissioner for Policy and Community Development. The bulk of my presentation is on rent help MN. But I just want to follow your direction, Chair Draheim. I'm happy to go through kind of and do this as a whole, or do this in parts and stop for questions, or just take questions as they come. So I'll just follow your lead, sir, as we move forward. So with that, I'll begin just to remind folks of what we're talking about in terms of dollar allocations. In total, Treasury sent $673 million to the state of Minnesota, but some of that went out to local jurisdictions of 200,000 people or more. So Minnesota Housing has the bulk of the money, and the local jurisdictions of Anoka, Dakota, Hennepin, and Ramsey County, Minneapolis and St. Paul have the remainder. So that's just to put that in context, My annual appropriations from you are about $63 million, just to put this in context. The amazing housing infrastructure bond that you passed this summer, $100 million. So this is over $500 million that will flow through the agency in about 1 year's time. I want to remind folks of just the broad goals of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. It was created so that people could maintain their housing stability during both the pandemic and the economic fallout that resulted. And really appreciating the fact that even early on in the pandemic, we understood that evicting people when we were trying to stay at home and stay safe wasn't a good idea, but also appreciating that eviction impacts renters' ability to have stable housing, oftentimes for years to come. It was also intended to get this money into the hands of the property owners to help them not only collect overdue rent, but to help them pay their bills as well. Property managers and property owners have continued to maintain their rental properties, and they have had to pay their bills throughout. And obviously, an incredible amount of uncertainty for those owners, large and small, throughout this. I think the lost income obviously has been incredibly stressful, and the inability to pay bills has been incredibly stressful for everybody. So the enormousness of this investment is really, I think, important just given the level of need that was out there. If you've been tracking the Rent Help MN dashboard, you'll know that we've had over 65,000 applications that have been submitted to date. Just a reminder that an application isn't a person and an application isn't a payment. You can have a household apply more than once if they come back for additional assistance after their initial payout. And a single application can have requests for multiple forms of assistance. You can be looking for help with rent and with utilities. To date, we've made over 61,000 payments, which represents assistance for 37,130 unique households. And then the pie graph on the side just simply shows you that the vast majority of assistance requested is, in fact, for the rent itself, with a smaller portion being allocated to water, sewer, trash, and utilities. And then there's the website for the dashboard if you haven't been following them along. The Congress limited eligibility to the program for people at 80% of the area median income. Generally, in Minnesota, that could be as high as about $100,000 for a family of four. But what you'll see is that 88% of applicants have very low incomes, earning less than 50% of that area median income. And 2/3 of applicants are extremely low income, which means that they're at 30% of area median income or below. So this is, and you can see actually the large number of households that are coming in reporting no income at all. So this is definitely reached very low income households, and low income households have been able to get applications in. We've also been tracking demographic data. And I think the rental market generally, we have a disproportionate number of households of color in the rental market, low-income households of color who have been impacted by the pandemic, who have been hit by this. So that's something that we've been tracking, and 2/3 of the applications have come from Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. Move on to payments. In September and October, we really began to see that backlog of initial applications get through the system and get paid, resulting in kind of a record month in October where we put up over $100 million. In November, we kept pace. So we have about $450 million of direct assistance budgeted between the two allocations. We've got about $400 million that have been requested to date. And as of the end of November, we had put out just shy of $274 million. Just some observations. The initial payouts and initial applications were oftentimes for higher dollar amounts. We continue to get new applications in every day, but we saw that the November average payouts were slightly lower than the October payouts. But if you take a look at the number of payments per month, you can see that we're moving along steadily with that part of the program. This next slide shows applications per month. We did see kind of a slowing down over the course of the summer, but as the fall has come, we have seen a significant uptick in the number of applications that have come in, with November rivaling April and May in terms of the number of applications. I suspect that this increase in the number of applications through the fall has been triggered by the key dates in the evictions moratorium off-ramp. So I just wanted to quickly bring that back up to remind us all of what those key dates are that have passed. I think in September, the September 12th date was when you could be evicted if you're behind and you're not eligible for rent help MN. October 12th was an incredibly busy day for the program. We could just, people who are watching the system could just see the applications coming in. It was the day that if you're eligible, you had to have a pending application in order to get the evictions protections, and it was the end of the 15-day pre-eviction filing provision. But we've seen steady rise in applications ever since. I'm going to talk more about evictions out when we get to slide number 15. You know, my top message for your constituents is the program is still open, and if folks have fallen behind on rent and are eligible, they should apply. You know, that the best applications that we see continue to be when renters and property managers, property owners are working together and are in communication. The team that processes applications can really tell when folks sat down together and got everything in and everything's lined up. There are documents that the Treasury requires us to collect, and there is a fair amount of back and forth in terms of making sure that we have everything that we need. So if you have an application pending, please make sure that you're paying attention, either if you gave us a phone number or your email or in your mail, if we're requesting more information from you. That back and forth and getting closure on the additional items has been one of the time-consuming elements of being able to get payments out the door. We hit a critical milestone right before Thanksgiving. The full amount of the first allocation of emergency rental assistance from the December Consolidated Budget Act of December of last year has been fully obligated or spent. And we began spending from the second allocation of emergency rental assistance that came with the American Rescue Plan in March. And that switch is an accounting switch behind the scenes. It's not something that applicants, neither the renter nor the property, needs to worry about. The application and the process are the same. For me, there's some important changes that happened between what Congress passed last December and what they passed last March. Most notably, the total number of months of assistance that a household is eligible for went from 15 months to 18 months. Here in month 21 of the pandemic, there are people who have been out of work that whole time. And then also, probably of more concern to me than anybody else, is that the Congress recognized that 10% admin allocation was not allowing us to do all the intensive hands-on people work that are required to process these claims and meet all the requirements that Congress put on the program. So it's been an increase in the admin allowance from the Congress as we move from the first allocation to the second allocation of the emergency rental assistance. Obviously that initial 10% budget on admin was hard because we had to get through the whole startup period, as well as the actual processing of applications. I think that we knew that we were going to have to really do a staff surge if we were going to be able to handle all the customer service and all the processing of applications. So I have gratitude that the Legislative COVID-19 Response Commission, affectionately known as the LCRC, approved $7 million from the State Fiscal Recovery Fund to allow us to pay for these higher staffing levels, both at the call center and for the processors of claims. That brings the administrative total from ERA 1 up to about 12%, but it really allowed us to be responsive to what it was that we were hearing from the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association, from properties and from users of the system, that we just needed to have more staff capacity to be able to do that.
Commissioner, if I could interrupt just for a second. On the staffing, so that additional staff is working on the call center. Can you just go into a little more detail of where you're using that staff?
Yeah, we have over 700 people today between the call center and the processing of the applications. Minnesota Housing has a handful of staff related to these federal stimulus programs, literally a handful compared to the hundreds of people. And that doesn't even include our nonprofit partners and our tribal partners who are working in the field. So the vast majority of people are taking calls and processing claims.
So the 7 million went to what part of that?
211 that manages the customer service and the contractor who's handling the processing of the application.
So that didn't go directly to hire more employees for your agency. It's more for the partners that you're working with.
Chair Graham, forgive my protocol, I'm a little rusty. You're correct, sir. None of that. We use a small portion of the 10% of the federal allocation to begin hiring staff. And then we also have the other federal stimulus dollars. So we've added modestly to the team compared to over 700 people who are working directly on this program that are not employees of Minnesota Housing.
And then a follow-up, if I could, on that. I'm hearing reports of rent help staff being at hearings in southern Minnesota. Do you have staff working for rent help that attend eviction hearings?
Chairman Graham, I've got a slide on that coming up about our work with the courts. We have regular Minnesota Housing staff who have volunteered, volunteered within the agency, but are working to support each of the 10 districts on the evictions process. I don't believe that anybody is actually in person, but they are available via Zoom to be able to connect with folks. And we're not using federal funds to pay those staff who are doing that. We're doing that with agency resources.
Okay, I will wait for that slide then. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question too?
Yeah, Senator Duckworth.
Thank you. Commissioner, just a quick question as you talk about the staffing surge and I guess using other affiliates to kind of help with the 211 call throughput, et cetera. And as you've planned to increase staff to handle this, is there also a plan on the back end to kind of taper this off or, downsize the staff or no longer have those relationships in place as the program ends or we get closer to it ending? And I just want to clarify that your intention has been, or what's currently happening is it's federal dollars being utilized for the staff and for the resources, and that we're not planning to, at least at the moment, utilize what would be state allocated resources for the staffing. Am I understanding that correctly?
Commissioner?
Chair, I'm Senator Duckworth. So I want to differentiate in your question to make sure that I'm understanding correctly the difference between Minnesota Housing staffing versus our subcontractor staffing, which are the staff that are handling the call center. No state resources, but the $7 million was from the state's, the federal investment in the State Fiscal Recovery Fund, so federal stimulus dollars that are being managed at the state. So that $7 million is federal money managed by the state that is paying for the staffing of our subcontractors. Is that the answer to that first half of the question, Senator Duckworth? It
is, thank you. So I would imagine that that's only going to be in existence so long as the program is in existence and you're needing them to operate it. I just want to make sure that it ends when the need ends, if that makes sense.
Chairman Draheim and Senator Duckworth, I mean, sadly, I think the need is going to continue long after all the money is gone. But when the need to administer the program ends because the money is gone, it will shut down quickly. So the 211 will resume their regular operations as a regular resource for people. And the folks that have been processing claims, those have been temporary jobs, and folks with our subcontractor, that will scale back very fast. There are some people, we know these federal stimulus investments have long tails. There's an incredible amount of detailed reporting that Congress and the Treasury have asked for, and we believe there's just going to be a fair period of time to just do all the reconciliation, both kind of on, claim by claim, but also in terms of just, we're working on a single audit. I'm sure there's going to be a long compliance tail on this money, but the vast majority of the staff who are operating will be gone as soon as we don't have applications for them to pay or money to make payouts with.
Thank you.
Any further? Okay. Senator Rosen.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, Senator Daines.
And I'm not sure if this is the time to ask this question, but when we're talking about staffing and stuff, Commissioner Ho, a couple weeks ago, I was with an owner, a landlord, and he was trying to call 211 to get some help on some questions. And after 45 minutes, he finally had to hang up because he couldn't wait any longer. That's unacceptable and unexcusable. What are you doing to correct that?
Chair Draheim and Senator Daines, the call times have been longer through the fall, and the 211 has added staff. We've done that up to the edge of our budget capacity. One of the reasons that the call wait times are longer is that we've given 211 more tools to actually resolve the thing that people are calling about. One of the things that people were concerned about was that the 211 couldn't answer some of the questions that they had because the information was in the hands of the entity that's actually processing the applications. So I think it's just where we're at in the life of the program. That call times are longer, but the amount of time spent on the phone with 211 is longer, and the ability to resolve the question that's being asked or resolve the final steps needed to get payment out the door are happening. Would encourage people to either budget time for the wait when they call in, or to try different times of day. My staff told me that whenever I suggest what time of day works better, that suddenly there's increased call volume that time of day. But what I know is that lunch is always peak, and sometimes early in the day or later in the day or on Saturdays is a lower call volume. And so I just think that we've thrown more money and people at this to be able to do it, but we're also at a stage of the program where the ability to resolve these claims and get them done is taking more time, and when it takes more time, it just means the next culvert needs to wait more longer. And I apologize to folks. I mean, I think we've seen this across the boards in customer service these days. I can't call the airline, I can't call my clinic, I can't call Walgreens, I can't call anybody, it seems, without having long call times. And it might be a part of just some of the staffing challenges that we're all facing in the market right now too.
Well, Mr. Chair and Senator Ho, or Commissioner Ho, I apologize. I think it's apparent that you certainly understand the issue. I'm not so sure that you understand the importance of having resolution to it.
Chair Draheim and Senator Daines, I absolutely do. We work with 211 on a daily basis. They have a sophisticated call center, a lot of metrics that they use to monitor this. There is also a challenge with just keeping high-quality staff in these high-stress jobs and being able to train and maintain quality control over it, and I still have the limitations of the budget in front of me.
Thank you, Senator Daines and Commissioner. I heard all summer long about the long call times from tenants and from housing providers. I think attached to the Zoom meeting invite was an email I got late last week that Joel included in on the Zoom invite. about a young couple having issues making ends meet. I believe he's either just finished his doctorate at the U or finishing it right now. So he's a highly educated, young family. You know, not English as a second language. There's no cultural issue here, and he's having a hard time, or their family's having a hard time jumping through the hoops, if you will, of rent help. And that's really disturbing that this late in the program, we're still having the same problems we did in early summer with the long wait times. And I'm hearing that both from tenants and property managers that literally spend all day on hold trying to get a hold of someone, only to be told they need to reapply for something they already did. I don't know how many times I heard from property managers that they were told that their building has to reapply when they've already gotten a bunch of checks. So what are we doing to fix those kind of those issues? I mean, he said in this email that he spent in the last 30 days 7.5 hours on hold. And that's a lot better than some of the other ones that I've received upsetting calls from people, and I'm sure you have too in your agency, and I want to thank your staff, of course. But what are we doing to make it go a little quicker?
Chairman Draheim, thank you for forwarding that message, and I did read that this morning, and I mean, I think there's a couple things here. I'll just own this. The length of time is actually longer today than it was this summer. And it's because of the fact that we have over 60,000 applications in that are being resolved. I think the part of the program that's working dramatically better is payment, volume, and payment speed. And so it's just the next part of this kind of, pig in a python and moving things through. Because we've given 211 more tools to answer the questions that come, they are able to resolve things, but it takes longer. To give you a sense of the volume, 211 has taken over 190,000 phone calls since this program got up and running. They're taking between 5,000 and 8,000 calls a week. I think their ability to resolve issues and to kind of troubleshoot when there's a problem has increased, but it just means that there's a higher period of time that they spend before they can pick up the next call. At some point in time, given the volume of payments that are going out the door, the number of applications that are still unresolved is going to go down, and just need to kind of get through this period, given the cap on the amount of administrative dollars that are available for this. So having the processing power is to me as important or more important to be able to make sure that we just keep resolving the payments, because when payments are made, then people don't need to call. Of course, once people are paid, if they get behind again, they can reapply. I think one of the things that was could benefit from clarification in terms of the email that you sent is that when folks are being asked to put additional information in the system, it's not actually a reapplication. All the information that they put in the system originally was there. But if something has changed or there's additional information that needs to go in order to complete a payment, the application is actually just kind of moved back into an initial status so that it can be opened by the property or the renter in order to put the additional information in. But it's not having to start an application from scratch. Likewise, if you're coming back for an initial 3 months of rent after your initial payment is made, all you need to do is hit the reapply button, and then it pulls from all the information that we had from you initially. I think one of the things that we expect is Those initial applications have required a lot of back and forth to get all the information that we need to make the right payment to the right entity, for the right renter at the right property. And as we get to the reapply stage, all that information has already been vetted and correct. So the second time that a property is paid on behalf of the same renter should be much, much smoother than the first time that it went through.
But Commissioner, we're not hearing that from the landlords and the property managers. And in this case, from this young couple, he says he got kicked back to pending initial review 6 times. 6 times. So for those people watching from home, my understanding is that it goes pending initial review, pending final review, funding, and then dispersed. And through this process, he's been kicked back 6 times, and there really isn't that much to upload. So he's shocked that it's taken this long. But I do see Senator Rest has her hand up. Thank you for being patient, Senator Rest. Did you have a question?
I don't have a question, I have a comment. I have received very, very different responses than you have, Senator Draheim and Senator Duckworth. In a meeting that I had with, let's see, there must have been 6 business people representing different sectors, and not particularly dealing with the rent aid, but they volunteered how successful the program had been for them. They were owners of or property managers of commercial properties, including apartment buildings, and quite frankly, they couldn't have been more appreciative or complimentary of the agency. So there is a different point of view out there, and maybe those who are dissatisfied contact you, and those that are pleased even when there are problems. And of course, we nothing that government does, I think we would all admit that, is ever 100% effective or works the way in which we want it to. But I just want to inject that particular viewpoint that came not from renters, but from who I've only heard a couple of complaints from, but from the people that are personally dealing with the program from the other side, day after day after day. And I admit I was kind of surprised. I expected a lot of complaints or serious complaints, and there just weren't any. So I just want us to keep that perspective in front of us as well, even as we offer criticism and constructive comments on how the agency can be more responsive, do things more effectively and more efficiently. And I appreciate the opportunity to give that point of view. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rest. My first initial thought was maybe those people were using the Zero Balance project run by the counties and not the state program, so it could be a little different program. And that program's been a little quicker to get the funds out. When they have the funds, sometimes they run out of money and there is a little delay. But that would be my
Senator
question.
Draheim, they did not specify the program. They talked about the whole of the initiative that had been from the state. They didn't say one program was bad and the other program was okay. They were commenting about all of it. So I just want to have that perspective. And I know that you're the person getting the complaints, but there are, and maybe the people who think it's working, either program, are just don't contact you. When something is going well, we don't often call people and say, good job. I don't doubt that there are issues, but I just want to make sure that overall that we get a different, that we know that people who are involved in rent help, both sides, the agency, renters, owners, property managers, people's experience can be vastly different. Thank you again.
Thank you, Senator Rest. Senator Rosen, thank you for
thank
being patient.
Yeah, no problem. Well, actually, Senator Duckworth asked my first question, but after listening to the commissioner, and I appreciate this healthy discussion about the pros and cons of the program. Commissioner, I was wondering, have you put in another request for some LCRC money to handle this issue? Because obviously, we are hearing that there are issues with 211, and it would be nice to see some proactive approach. And if you do need some more money to handle this, or the resources, whatever you need to be more responsive, I think that's something that we really need to take a strong look at.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Chair Draheim and Senator Rosen. I appreciate that. We've shifted from the first allocation. We've totally, obligated the first allocation of ERA that had the 10% rent cap in it, and we've just moved into ERA 2. We have these kind of more staff than ever working on the program. So I think we're watching to see if that creates the relief that we need. But I appreciate the invitation to consider coming back if need be, and I'm sure all my staff who are listening in heard that as well, and we'll look to that. I think, if you.
Commissioner, I can't hear you for some reason right now.
We may have lost her. She froze. Oh, we may have lost her. By computer?
One of the things when I've been able to travel, or when I've been able to zoom into meetings with different property groups, the conversation has allowed us to sort through the difference between what program features exist because the Congress and the Treasury require them, versus where am I making discretionary decisions related to the administration of the program. And I think because in make sure I get my calendar years right here. Because in 2020, we were able to run the program without congressional rules and Treasury oversight, we could run the program the way that we designed it. In 2021 with Rent Help MN, I need to run the program the way that the Congress designed it. And there's some design decisions that they made that makes the program more complex and more burdensome in order to collect all the documentation that I'm required to show. When I've been able to be in direct conversation with property owners and property managers, and we talk through that, that's something that I think some folks didn't appreciate. They just wish that it was easier to use. And I think, one metaphor that we've been using internally lately is it's kind of less like a Venmo payment and more like, working with your homeowner's insurance after a hailstorm where the whole state got hailed on the same day, right? This is like an insurance claim with an adjuster in order to get reconciled to the right amount of payment. It's not like a stimulus check that just got deposited into your account. And I get that people wish that it were easier. Believe me, I wish that it were more simplified, but it needs to follow the letter of the law. And I was in a conversation with folks at the White House, the Treasury, about this a couple weeks ago, and the reporting requirements back to Treasury are so detailed and specific that you can't give them what they're requiring on the reporting and compliance side without being able to check all these boxes. And so I appreciate, Chair Draheim, what you said about sometimes people have to go back and forth what feels like way too many times. But also, you know, if things change because somebody did pay their back rent, so it changes how much the total amount is owed. I mean, all those things can be changing every time we cross over into a new month. The most important thing is that when we do issue a payment, we make sure that we're reflecting the date and time in which we make the payment. So if somebody applied in October and we're making the payment in December, the payment will reflect the November and the December past due rent, and that the 3 forward months are January, February, and March. And then just one other thing I wanted to just point out is that, I mean, one of my tests of, is this something that is uniquely problematic to me, or is this something that's associated with the program, is I have stayed very much in close contact with my peer group around the country, as well as those local jurisdictions that are running their programs. And you know, we face, we're facing the same challenges. You know, we've had similar issues related to speed, customer service, and compliance. So and if this were a regular program that hadn't gotten up and running in less than 4 months and had an opportunity to be tested and focus grouped and baited and all that stuff, you know, I think that it would work a lot differently. But I think we're just operating under these one-time unusual constraints, and they're suboptimal, but money is getting out the door. And the happiest day, I think, for any property is the day the check arrives. And when I talk to properties now compared to July, there's a lot more increased confidence that because they've seen money, that even if there's a couple that are caught up in the back and forth, that the money is getting out the door and they will be paid. Sorry for that long-winded answer. I didn't intend to be so long-winded there, sir. Chairman, I don't know if you want to take the other questions.
Senator Rosen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that. A little question on the last bullet point of your slide there, added tools for the 211 specialists to better assist applicants. What is the training program for your specialists? And do you also document how long a call takes to, you know, for people to be able to reach a 211, and how long it takes for them to apply and receive their check? Is there any documentation on that, or averages?
Chair Draheim and Senator Rosen, thank you for the question. You know, 211 has run a call center for a long time, and it's a state-of-the-art call center. And I mean, one of my first jobs at Blue Cross Blue Shield is I ran a call center for Medicare claims, and we kind of took it from, let's say that was in the 90s. So we kind of took it from 1980s technology to up-to-date technology. And, you know, you could see as a manager of a call center what your call times were just by looking at a screen in the corner. You got a daily report that told you your outliers, you know, how many calls you dropped, when did people, you know, stop waiting on hold. So 211 really has the expertise of a state-of-the-art call center to be able to manage the metrics on this, and then we meet with them on a very regular basis to just talk through those and to problem solve what we're doing. In terms of number of days to payment, it really has varied greatly, and it has everything to do with how complete an application is when it first comes in the door. And when the people who are processing the application have to request additional information, how long it takes for that information to come back. We've had a concerted effort throughout the fall. We have a team of people that's focused specifically on the oldest and the aging claims. So going all the way back to April 20th when we opened. We really just have a very small number that are there, and the vast majority of those just got caught up because people haven't gotten back to us, and we've had some repeated attempts to try to get follow-up information. So we got one team that's working the backlog of the older claims, while we've had teams that have been taking the new ones as they come in the door. So one of the things that we're seeing is that applications that came in October and in November are getting touched faster because they're not behind the backlog. The one other thing I just wanted to mention in response to the story that you referenced, Chair Draheim, is that the system is set up so that if you're being asked to submit additional information, when it comes in, it goes back to the top of the queue for the person who's processing your claim. So it's not like you go back to the end of the line and have to wait to come forward again. The system is set up so that you get priority handling when you get back to the processors with the information that they were waiting for.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner. Yes.
I do have a follow-up. I'm not sure, Commissioner, if maybe I didn't understand your answer to my question. Have you applied for more LCRC money? I think there is about a couple hundred left in the fund. And have you looked at more funding from LCRC?
Thank you, Chair Draheim and Senator Rosen. We did request $20 million from the State Fiscal Recovery Fund that was approved by the LCRC in November for additional assistance for people who hit their 18-month cap. Because we just switched over from the first allocation of emergency rental assistance to the second allocation, that permits us a 15% admin as opposed to the 10% admin cap that we had. We're waiting to see if we can solve the problems that we have today with the money that we have available because of the more generous allocation of admin that Congress gave in the second allocation. But I do appreciate the invitation to consider coming back in for State Fiscal Recovery Fund dollars if that's what we need in order to get this done. We're at the point right now where we're moving money so fast out the door. I have the feeling that we're going to be in wind down mode instead of ramp up mode very, very soon. This is just the moment that we're in.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Port's been waiting a while. Senator Port, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, Commissioner, to that, the 211, the tools that you've given to 211, a lot of the information that we get in from our constituents is obviously anecdotal because we simply just have a few contacts regarding this. I've been staying in touch with a lot of our property managers throughout the district. And one of the things that they have been telling me anecdotally over the last month or so is that when they do have a problem and call in, yes, the wait time might be long, but they only have to call in once now because they are able to solve the problem when they get to 211. Are you able to get us actual data on, are there still multiple touches happening on each application? Has that number come down? Is there any way that you all are tracking that you could get us sort of broader data across the scope of the program to verify, I guess, the way that these tools are actually helping more consistently?
Thank you, Senator Port. You read my mind. Commissioner Ho.
Chair Draheim and Senator Port, thank you for the question. I think, the answer is, are we tracking all this? Yes. The last analysis that we did on time to process, the two biggest variables were the completeness of the application at the time of submission and how long it took to get additional information and how complete that was. So the more times that we had to go back and forth, obviously, the longer it took to process a claim. And so those are the biggest factors. And, the key issue there, I think, is when the property and the renter are working together at the time of submission, working the checklist, helping with the technology to make everything that needs to get sent in can be sent in. I have not had the opportunity to do an analysis of whether the November applications that came in are coming in more complete than the applications that came in April and May. We just have some bandwidth issue on our curiosity is greater than our analytic capability right now, but it is something that we're working with our processor all the time in terms of just looking at the older claims and getting those through the queue to resolution looking at things at the door. We meet with 211 and the field partners and the processor on a regular basis to find out what are the types of questions that people are asking now. Because the types of conversations that we're having today are very different than the people who are calling in July are just saying, when am I going to get my money? We had a lot of people who just, because we weren't doing a lot of payments yet, just, were calling, every week, when am I going to get my money? When am I going to get my money? Now we're dealing kind of with more of the substantial, these are the things, the final steps that we need. These are the things that aren't reconciling right in the system. We're in December now, so this triggers, another month of assistance if you put an application in, say, in October. So, I mean, we're just dealing with those kind of practical issues associated with being able to resolve the claims. But I think the data is being collected at a granular level. So certainly the ability to manage this both in real time, but also I think after the fact, when there's just some ability to breathe, frankly. Yeah, I think, I think there's a lot of lessons both statewide and nationally that people want to learn about the impact of this size of an investment by the federal government in this type of a program. And, figuring out how to run it so that emergency assistance is available to people in the emergency to solve the emergency, I think is one of the key factors of that. But also I think what were the elements of the requirements that made it more onerous and therefore longer to get through.
Thank you, Commissioner. We got to keep on rolling here. We got 2 more subjects to get to. Maybe you could just provide some data to all the members on the committee on the 211 calls, and I'm sure they track that, being a high-tech call center. Maybe call volume by month and wait times, drop calls, et cetera. Whatever data they had, I think would be wonderful to share with the committee.
I have, Chair Graham, I have a few more questions on Rent Help MN. I can just, or a few more slides. I can just run through them really quickly, or
Perfect.
Mr. Peters? Okay, I'll go through them quickly. So we also have more resources. Next slide, please, Ryan, for both, for the applicants. And by applicants, I mean both the property and the renter. You can get a letter confirming your pending application status. You can either download that if you're using it online, or you can get it from 211. There's a letter that goes out with the payment detailed in terms of what's been approved and paid out for assistance. The Public Utilities Commission works with us to understand how applying for utility arrears could be a protection against shutoff as we moved into the cold weather months. We also set up a specialized team at the processor who's working with the larger property owners that have multiple properties. I think that was part of the conversation, Chair Graham, when we were together down in New Prague. We are working, as I mentioned before, with the courts. The courts have asked for a lot of assistance from the agency to help untangle, I think, what's a pending application, what's not a pending application, what's a paid application. They've expressed a lot of interest in seeing where they can use the fact of a possible eviction as a way to get that win-win of everybody getting paid. As I mentioned, we have regular Minnesota housing staff that are putting in time to be available to the 10 court districts for the day that housing court is in, and have been able to provide information just on the status of applications on over 690 instances that were with the courts, and we've just had some very positive feedback from the courts about our ability to support them in that. I mentioned the additional $20 million. Next slide, please, Brian. The additional $20 million that the LCRC approved from the State Fiscal Recovery Fund. Again, this is the same process for renters. It's just the reapply button. It's an accounting thing to be able to use the State Fiscal Recovery Fund money to cover months for folks who have maxed out at 18 months. Estimate of perhaps as many as 7,000 households while we're still up and running that will max out on that assistance. There was a lot of conversations back in September when there was a critical deadline with Treasury around trying to give money back. We surpassed our, please run. We passed the federal obligation in the September 30th date. Can somebody ping Ryan to move the slide, please? There we go, thank you. And as I said, as of before Thanksgiving, we had all of ERA1 obligated. In my conversations with Treasury and the White House, it's really unlikely that the federal government is going to take money away from one state and give it to another state. They've said that their first way of doing reallocation was going to be within state boundaries. Of course, we've been in close conversation with the 6 jurisdictions that are running programs, many of them in partnership with us, because they're using Rent Help MN to process their local jurisdiction money in many cases as well. None of us actually think it's likely to get money, but we had a deadline for asking for it, and Minnesota Housing did say to the Treasury that we could justify $231 million of additional money if they were to recapture it from other states. The odds of that are very, very slim, I think. Yes, sir.
Commissioner, one question on 211 that I don't think we've really addressed is when you were in my district, one of the local property managers had talked about their tenants being coached by 211 not to pay their rent. Did you do an investigation on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Draymond. I mean, yes, there is nothing in any of the program material. There's nothing in any of the operations manuals. There's nothing in the training protocol that suggests that the message is that people shouldn't pay their rent. And I have tried to consistently say the message: if you can pay your rent, you should pay your rent. And I've yet to see somebody give me a written document from the Rent Help MN program where that is kind of a written statement. So beyond that, I'm hard pressed to, we've got a lot of people that are handling calls, and but there's quality assurance from 211 and others. And where, staff are off message, there's a whole supervisory and oversight mechanism to do that. I think, as I've reflected on this, I think one of the things for property owners is that they're used to being paid first. Matthew Desmond, who's written so much about evictions, used the great line that the rent eats first. And I think that the presence of this money, we've heard in some instances that people have been able to think about whether they're going to pay for a critical healthcare thing or they're going to pay for food. And they've been able to kind of make those decisions in a way that in the regular operation of the world, there wasn't any money available for rent, and the consequences of not paying rent were immediate eviction. And so I think people have been able to weigh their scenarios in a way where this money changed the calculation in people's heads. I remember being a kid out of college, and I knew who sent the nastygram fastest between my utility companies and stuff like that on months where I was cutting it close, and you just kind of learn to operate that way when you're operating paycheck to paycheck. But there is nothing in the program design, the program materials, the training materials, or in our understanding with our partners that would be a message that would come up from the program. And I invite any property who has received something in writing that they've interpreted to say that to please get it directly to me.
And then my last question has to do with the court cases that were alluded to earlier. We're getting reports of staff helping tenants, which is a good thing, but it kind of contradicts what the letter of the law was, or when we wrote this statute, I guess, and passed our legislation on this, that they had to have an application in. And my understanding is a lot of the court cases are being stopped right in the middle, and they're applying during the hearing, more or less, to stop them from being evicted. But what is the training that goes along with that? What is the normal procedure?
Chairman Draheim, Minnesota Housing staff is there to provide information to the courts, to the property, to the renters about rent help MN and the status of an application when evictions are taking place. People might have legal aid, they might have a mediator. In many instances, what we've heard from the courts and the judges themselves is that they like to mediate eviction resolution in the presence of this money because everybody gets made whole, that the courts were interested in how this money was going to work. And so, we have stayed open for applications. Our interpretation of the evictions off-ramp wasn't that this program would shut down on October 12th. We've stayed open for applications because we still have money available. And, we have people who are coming into the program today that are behind for the first time now. And so they're coming in with an application for past due rent. So I think that what we're doing is simply trying to provide information. The courts have never had to interact with a statewide program of this magnitude. And so they have asked for help just understanding, what is the status of an application? And yes, I mean, courts might use the fact that they have a property and a renter standing in front of them or zooming in front of them or however court actually works these days, and use it as an application to say, an opportunity to say, are you aware of this program and have you applied? And so we are just trying to be of assistance to the courts. My agency has never worked with the courts before. It's a separation of powers thing. But the courts have been very interested from really the day the evictions moratorium off-ramp was passed by you all to really understand what their role in this was going to be when evictions could be filed again. And so we've tried to figure out how to be available just to answer their questions and help out with the process.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think we'll switch gears real quick here and go to HIBs, housing infrastructure bonds. We do have two subjects left, and I'm trying to be mindful of everybody's time.
I have the ballot measures to that next, but do you want me to jump over to the housing infrastructure bonds? I can do it either way.
Yeah, I think so. I think we try, if we have time, we can sure go back to that, but I'd like to just get all three subjects in real quick.
Okay. So I only have 2 slides on the housing infrastructure bonds after this header slide.
Okay.
You'll remember that when you authorized $100 million in housing infrastructure bonds this legislative session, yay, there was a contingency put on them. The bipartisan infrastructure bill hadn't been passed yet. And I think the Build Back Better bill was still being just discussed. It hadn't been passed by the House yet. And so the contingency was that if there were federal dollars passed, that we'd come back and take a look at whether they were same uses or different uses than what the housing infrastructure bonds could be used for. And it would decrease the authorization or limit how bonds were used based on that. The bill that the president just signed in the middle of November, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, did not have any housing-specific resources. No resources come to the agency as a result of that. There's some adjunct things that we're interested in. It has some stuff on lead and broadband and other things like that, but there's nothing in the bill that has passed and been signed into law that's for housing. And obviously, the House passed the Build Back Better bill, but it's still in front of the Senate. If the Senate passes that, it's conferenced, I'm guessing, because I doubt the Senate will sign it or pass it exactly as the House did. If they do pass something, we'll have to pause. We've already put a pause on our annual selections. Instead of doing them this month, we'll be doing them next month so that we have an opportunity to see whether or not the Congress acted. And then if there's a housing component, we'll probably have to hit pause just to go through all the detail to figure out where the areas of overlap are and what to do about it. But as of today, I feel like we're mainly in wait and see mode to see whether or not the Senate passes something. and whether it materially looks like what the House passed, and whether that gets done by the date that's in the contingency, December 31st of this year. So I owe you a report back on that by January 15th. So obviously if something passes, we will be reading through the details super fast in order to be able to understand this. The federal bill, that better bill is complex, but it hits in a number of key ways: improvements to the housing tax credit, expansion of housing tax credits for single family construction, increases in two major HUD funding streams that we use, the National Housing Trust Fund and the Home Investment Partnership Program. We use that to predominantly to build new, very targeted housing for very low income populations. And then it does some stuff around down payment assistance for people to buy a home. I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than what I just summarized there, but that's just kind of the 20,000 foot version of what the House passed in this bill. Do you want me to pause for questions on this?
Yeah, please, Commissioner. Senator Port's been waiting a while, then Senator Rosen also has her hand up. Senator Port.
Thank you, Chair Draheim. You touched on it just a little bit. If you could go into more detail, Commissioner, on what has the practical effect of us writing that contingency into there? What effect has that had on your program decisions this year?
I appreciate the questions, Chairman Draheim and Senator Port. I think that as we have moved through our regular annual selections process and having the opportunity to, you kind of match projects to which flavor of money that we touch works the best for them. I think the effect of the contingency and the fact that the federal investments, that there's actually a possibility that they'll happen. I mean, I want to say that if the federal government does what the House has passed, it would be the largest federal investment in housing in my lifetime. And I'm not feeling very young anymore. I think this is the same, as big as, the New Deal, perhaps, in terms of federal investments in housing. But the changes in the tax credit provisions and the potential that some of the housing infrastructure bonds would no longer be eligible has the practical effect that some of the projects that we would be selecting in January will be delayed until the federal funds that could be used instead become available. So that all depends on the speed of HUD and the speed of Treasury around guidance and allocation of those funds. So it's possible that things that I could have been selecting in December or could have been selecting in January won't actually get money attached to them until a year or two from now. So those developments or preservation projects would have to wait.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Senator and Commissioner. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. So have you, what has the conversations with the stakeholders about the possibility of these funds being available, and how quickly do you think you can get those funds out the door when the RFP does close?
Commissioner?
Chair Draheim and Senator Rosen, just a clarifying question. Are you talking about the selections that we're making right now?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair Draheim, Senator Rosen. This is capital investments in development and preservation deals. So usually a selection that we make in November or December of a year, that project is doing a bunch of paperwork and lining up of all their other financing with a hope of getting to a closing by the end of the year and a groundbreaking by the end of the year. Some of these deals that had additional gap financing that they need to raise, some of the more, we call them hairy deals in the agency, it's a term. Some of them take maybe longer, but we also have a couple outliers. But it's more about the complexity of doing, a $20, $30 million capital deal and what it takes to piecemeal, patchwork all the different funding streams together. We're a part of that. But I'd say the nice thing about being commissioner in my third year is that I'm actually being able to go to grand openings of projects that I was there when we selected. Projects that, some having the opportunity to kind of see things that I remember, like actually reading about my first year when I was learning the process. I think with the federal money, the timeline is a little more uncertain. The Home American Rescue Plan money that was set up in March, we had our allocations, I think, in the summertime, but HUD only just issued guidance for those funds this September, and they outlined a set of requirements where we do a bunch of community engagement in terms of the use of those funds. So sometimes the new federal money is going to have its own timeline based on the pathway that HUD decides to take with those dollars. In some instances, it's new uses of existing streams. In some cases, it's existing uses of existing streams. Existing uses of existing streams are much easier than new uses of new streams. And so with kind of new uses of existing streams being somewhere in the middle, if that makes sense.
Senator Rosen?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner, I thought that, we had added some language in that you guys had requested, and I don't think you guys ever communicated to me at least that our contingency would add a delay. We worked with you guys to craft the language and implied the RFP would be issued this fall. So this is a little concerning for me. I thought that's why we put that language in when we passed our bills this last year. Any comment on that, Commissioner?
Yeah, Chairman Draheim, the RFP that we're currently processing was already out in May before the session was out. So we had already begun, that annual process, which is what we do usually. And then we usually just find out how much appropriations and housing infrastructure bonds we have, and we can plug it in as we're making final determinations at the end of the year. I think, it's my recollection, but I'll go back and talk to Ryan and Dan, that it was an interest of the legislature to put the contingency language in because of the size of the federal investment. The agency didn't really have a need for that, but it was something that the legislature was interested in, so we worked with you on language that would be workable. My understanding of this is the legislature's interest. I think probably a lot of folks in the development community haven't tracked it at this level of detail. So I think that come January, we'll have to do a lot of communicating with the development community. If projects that thought that they had high likelihood of getting selected don't get selected, and certainly can keep you in the loop as we see whether or not the Congress passed and the President signs a second bill.
Okay. And then my follow-up would be, I know we're short on time, but would be on the single-family homes portion of the HIBs and how that program is looking, and any comment on that?
Chair Draheim, we're in the middle of selections, so in an open RFP, they teach the commissioner very early on to just smile and nod, but not to preview who may or may not get selected. But let me just say we had some good single-family projects in the competition this year, and we look forward to making announcements.
Can you just briefly talk about how many applications you received, or how's it looking?
Yeah, Chair Draheim, I don't have that information at my fingertips today, and I'm standing alone in my home office. But we can follow up with you in terms of what we can share about the application pool. I know that while the competition is open, there are some things that we're prohibited from talking about, but we'll hopefully be making selections by the end of January and can talk about what we have. We did do a set of what we call early no's. I like to call them not yet, but some projects that just clearly weren't going to get money. Sometimes it's in the developer's best interest to know they're not going to get money, so that if they have costs associated with site control and things like that, they can move forward with that information. So but let me check with my team and we can follow up in writing with information that we can share. I just know that there are some things I can't legally share because we have an open competition taking place.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Members, any other questions on this subject? Okay. And then the last piece that we had on the agenda today was the rent control. And I think you had a couple slides on that, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Graham. I mean, these are issues that Minnesota Housing doesn't really have anything to do with, but as I've had visits during the legislative interim, it's certainly an area that people have a lot of interest in. So I thought I would just make sure that the letter of those ballot initiatives and what they do and don't do, that you have that information in front of you. I really feel like the role of Minnesota Housing is just really focus on production and preservation and the affordability of housing where we have the opportunity to invest. To take the St. Paul ballot question first, it was short, specific, and a yes vote meant that rent increases are restricted to no more than 3% in a 12-month period, regardless of whether there is a change in occupancy. I believe that is supposed to go into effect on May 1st of next year, and I think that Mayor Carter has been fairly straightforward about the fact that he's trying to understand what's in his authority to improve this language in response to his conversation with some developments that are pending, and the importance of developers to be able to raise the capital that they need on critical projects. But that one was, I would say, at least kind of, it was clear and specific. The Minneapolis language is more, I think it was kind of more of a taking the pulse. This is the opportunity, the city council is being told that they can enact an ordinance or they can pose another ballot question after they've had an opportunity to think about how they would implement something related to rent. So Minneapolis is kind of checking with the voters at the beginning of the process, whereas the St. Paul one is kind of has the specific effect of an ordinance starting in May. I don't, like I said, this is not an area that the agency works in. It's not an area where I have personal depth of experience or expertise. I have talked to the housing directors in both Minneapolis and St. Paul and wanted to offer the agency as a resource in terms of just data, if there's anything that we can do to inform their processes, but that's the extent that I think that Minnesota Housing will be involved in these local initiatives.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair? Thank you. And Commissioner, thanks. Fully acknowledge the fact that you and your agency had no part in crafting these pieces of legislation that were enacted or passed in two other cities. That being said, I know in full transparency, we discussed the notion of rent control in the state of Minnesota and the possibility that the state might introduce legislation that would prevent it from happening or prevent two laws like this from actually being enacted in the state of Minnesota. And so to the extent that the housing agency participates in statewide conversations as it relates to legislation and the positions that we take or that your agency takes on legislation that's being introduced that would impact some of these laws that are crafted at the local level is helpful. And I don't anticipate those conversations are going to end anytime soon. I know that as this committee met a few months ago, many opinions were shared regarding rent control, how it would potentially impact the state or certain cities, et cetera. And I anticipate we're going to have those conversations again moving forward. And your expertise and what your agency is experiencing or anticipates will be extremely critical to shaping those conversations and the legislation that the state of Minnesota looks at moving forward. So all that to say, and it might be early, however, I'd like to get your take on how do you think MHFA or what do you anticipate these policies, the effect they'll have or how they might impact private development in the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul? Have you heard anything in any of the meetings that you've had, or has your agency done any analysis to see that now that these are likely to be enacted, how that might play out and impact housing needs or the housing situation in those cities.
Chair Draheim and Senator Duckworth, thank you. I'll say that
We lost her again.
I think we lost your volume there, Commissioner.
It's my computer here. It keeps, the internet keeps disconnecting.
plugged in?
The Wi-Fi.
but obviously the day after the election, it did get my attention, and it's something that that the agency will pay attention to. At this point in time, the administration doesn't have a well thought out or publicly informed.
Can you still hear me by
position
chance?
on this?
I
So
don't think she can hear me either.
where I am is probably about, the same as anybody who's been reading the paper or listening to the news. I'm trying to sort this out.
Commissioner Ho?
We're having some technical issues. Just 1 second, I'm very sorry.
Yeah. Sir, I'm having a problem hearing you now, and there's once again a lot of reverb.
We're having an issue hearing you on our end, so we're fixing it in the room. I apologize. If you could just pause for 1 moment until we get you back up and running, and I'll let you know. Or Senator Draheim will. Thank you. Sorry about that.
You're on a roll.
All right, now we should be.
I think we got you.
Can you hear me?
Commissioner, very, very sorry. Technical issues here with our hardware. Please continue. We missed part of that.
Chairman, just answer that question from the top, because I don't know where I cut out. But I'll just say that I understand that because these initiatives both passed, it's an area where the agency is going to need to pay attention. There isn't any detail developed yet on the Minneapolis one. It's the beginning of their process. And so I think there will be some lively debate in Minneapolis as they think about whether they want to do something or what they want to do. I don't think they're even compelled to do something given the language. And obviously, we'll be paying attention to the decisions that they make in St. Paul and the impact. I mean, for us, most of the time, when we use federal or state resources in an investment, there are already some rent restrictions that come along with the use of those funds. So, we operate in an environment where oftentimes HUD is the entity that's kind of establishing rent reasonableness, including how much rents change from year to year. But there are places like down at the old Ford plant and other places where Minnesota Housing has commitments, as does the city, and where conversations are going to be had about whether developments are able to move forward as proposed. So we'll be engaged in those, but the administration at this time, we just haven't done the work. We haven't talked to our stakeholders. We haven't gathered research and information on other places in such a way that the administration has a position on this issue at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Dietzick, unless Senator Duckworth has a follow-up, I think we'll go to Senator Dietzick here in the room. Okay, Senator Dietzick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to follow up on what Senator Duckworth said, because I do think that this is something that we will need to look at. Representing Minneapolis, I had a lot of discussion over the last few months on the, and Minneapolis was more open-ended than the St. Paul ballot initiative. It was more, should we have these conversations? And so we were having a lot of these conversations in neighborhood meetings, and you had a lot of small landlords who were raising the questions of, well, I have to pay my property tax, and I have to, what happens if I have, we have storm damage, or I need to do some upgrades, and then balance that with constituents who their building was bought, and so the rent then goes up $400 a month. So people can't afford that, and so how do we balance that out? And so I think it is a very, it is something we should have that conversation, because people can't afford $400 a month increases on rent. But then you also need to be fair. We also don't want property owners, property owners need to maintain that property. There's also been stories in landlords in Minneapolis who were not maintaining their properties, and they've been atrocious, and the city or the tenants have to go to court. And so what is that balance so that we can find a way that people can afford to live in safe homes across the state? So thank you. And I look forward to trying to figure out that question, because it's not an easy one, but I think we have to dig into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dietzich, and I think we're all in agreement on that. You know, I've had landlords call me concerned if this spreads outside of the metro because of the energy prices they're looking at facing this year with energy prices going up so high. There are quite a few landlords in my area where the heat is included in the rent, and if the heat's gonna double, you know, how do they do that and still pay their taxes and their insurance and their mortgage, et cetera? But thank you, all good points. Commissioner, do you have any final comments? Senator Duckworth has one more comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. And it's really just a quick question. I wanted to give time for the other topics, but it relates to rent help MN, if that's okay. It's kind of a fast one. And I want to make sure I'm even asking the right question. So, Commissioner, do you know, I know when we were crafting our bill a few months ago, the housing bill, we had some conversations surrounding the funds available to us from the federal government and whether or not those funds could be utilized to help offset payments owed to property owners who couldn't recapture rent that they lost out on because the tenant had already moved on and vacated the property. And one of the sticking points we had in crafting our bill here in Minnesota was the federal government didn't necessarily allow for those funds to be utilized in that scenario. Has that changed, or has the federal government now provided additional guidance that would allow us to do that? Do you know?
Commissioner.
Chair Draheim and Senator Duckworth, the Treasury did put out language, I believe in August, and we implemented that language, I believe the first week in October. And what it says specifically, the Treasury kind of put some lines around it. The Treasury said that the previous renter still needs to request it, so it doesn't take the person who's left out of the equation. They still have to request it, because I mean, it is still a win-win, because they get rid of that credit obligation and can move forward. We've seen instances where the property manager and the renter worked out an agreement and have requested this. So there's a pathway for folks to be able to do this, but the Treasury was really clear that the renter still needs, or the previous renter still needs to be engaged and involved in that process.
Senator Duckworth?
So just a quick follow-up to that would be any stipulations or requirements that we're requiring folks to work through as it relates to this program is coming from how the federal government has worded or structured this program. We're not adding any additional requirements at the state level in regard to the program for them to be able to recapture this assistance. Would that be a fair statement?
Commissioner?
Yeah, Chairman Draheim and Senator Duckworth, it's a different set of attestations that people have to sign, because the attestations that existed prior to implementing this included "I am still in the unit," which was the Treasury had required. So there's a different set of things, but it's not a set of over and above. It was just what we needed to do to be compliant with the Treasury's new guidance.
Thank you. And lastly, I just want to thank you for your kind words at the beginning of the hearing. And like Senator Rest mentioned, we don't often get told we're doing a good job for the things that are going well. We tend to focus on where we can improve. From what I recall, the last time we met this summer, from where we are now, a lot more applications processed, a lot more money out the door. Obviously, as a result of this hearing, there are still things we can do to improve, probably a lot so on the customer service side. And so thanks to you and your team for constantly hearing our feedback and finding how we can improve this process and improve the assistance that's going out the door. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. I appreciate that.
Senator Port, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Draheim. I'll try to be quick. Just walking through all three of these, the rent help, the rent control, and the HIB, today really has sort of highlighted for me, and something I've been thinking about before anyway, is that 30% AMI. Even if we establish rent control immediately today and froze all rent across the state of Minnesota, which is obviously not happening, we are still 100,000 units short of that, the need for that 30% AMI based on the Minnesota Housing Partnership study this year. And I mean, like, to me, that is a huge concern, and this rent help money is going to run out soon. It's not a program that's going to run forever. We're going to exhaust it before the need is over. I'm still just go back to the very first time you presented to us in this committee last year, talking about if there was one thing you could change, it was just more. We need more. That has stuck with me through all of this. And I'm wondering two questions. One, if you can, I'm sure you don't have it, but if you can get us information on what percentage over the last several years of HIB funds have been used for that sort of 30% AMI need, and how are we even making a dent in it? Are we starting to sort of improve that need, or is it growing because wages aren't increasing? Where are we with that? And then secondly, just can you talk briefly about, after the pandemic or through the pandemic, how much has that increased the urgency for that group of families in Minnesota?
Commissioner?
Chairman Draheim and Senator Port, thank you for the question. I mean, a lot of renters and homeowners were paying more than 30% of the federal standard, and some even more than 50% of their total take-home income on renter housing. And I mean, that's just a challenge to be able to juggle the bills. And obviously, I think some of the stimulus money helped, but it's all going away, and we don't know how long the pandemic is going to last at this point in time. We're also over it, and we don't know how long the economic recovery is going to take. We know it takes longer for some than for others. Housing by and large in Minnesota and in this country is a private market. It's a private market, period. And there's some state and federal assist, but the state and federal assist has never been and is not big enough to be able to make housing affordable, especially for folks that make the least. I have maintained and continue to maintain, and so much gratitude for the year after year housing infrastructure bond opportunities, and with this federal money, as much as I know how much pain all that goodness will create. This requires a multi-year effort, and it requires a multi-year effort that's targeted at people who make the least. And the reason that it needs to be targeted from government at people who make the least is that the private market tends to people who make more. And so, I think one of the things that we've done at the agency in my tenure is we've taken a look at the agency's role in how rents get set in projects that we finance, and have done more to use the fact that we're financing them to help drive rents down, both in terms of prioritizing which projects we fund, but also in the final underwriting in the final deal. We literally are looking at what the rental limit is per unit. And we shouldn't be putting state and federal money into something where the rent's too high for somebody to be able to use a housing choice voucher and not be able to leverage in those federal funds. We really just need to understand that building units at 60% AMI, 50% AMI, 30% AMI, that's kind of a vital contribution when the public invests in housing. And so, we do lots of other amazing things like help people, first generation home buyers and things like that. It's really important as well. We can't be, it's not an either or here. The same way it's not an either or between preservation and new production. My hope is that if we get a federal infusion, I think it's a 5-year infusion from the feds, if it were completed the way that it passed out of the House, and if we have kind of a sustained commitment at the state, we can actually help the development community expand the pipeline so that we have more good projects coming through. I think I've mentioned this before. Even with a good housing infrastructure bond year, I say no to 3 out of 4 things that come in the door because I don't have more resources to do more. I would like to say yes to almost everything that comes through the door. Every now and then just one of them just isn't viable. It's not going to happen. But again, it's about selecting because of scarcity of resource, not because of the goodness. But the developer community also needs to develop the capacity to have me say yes to more than one of their projects every year. Because if you submit 3 and you only expect to get 1, you have planned capacity to build 1. I would like to get to the place where the developer community can submit 4 and expect to get all 4 and have the capacity to do that. I think the jobs market and lots of other things are going to be factors in that along the way. So I have maybe more answer to that question than you wanted at this late hour. Perhaps Chairman Draheim, the best thing for the commissioner would just be brevity and thanking you for the opportunity to be in front of you in the committee today. I was also looking, Senator Duckworth, when I was in front of you in July, I hadn't spent $11 million yet. Hitting 274 at the end of November to me is proof that we're getting the job done, and the fact that we're going to be thinking about how we shut this thing down in less than a year from when it got up and running, I think is the next big challenge. We will keep you posted on what's in a second federal bill if it passes the Senate and sign into law. And how that impacts the selections from this year. But thank you very much for your time, your attention, kind of your commitment and passion for these issues, and for being in dialogue with me during the interim, and even for those who were able to host the visit. It was nice. Some of you I've only known 2-dimensionally. It was nice to be able to meet 3-dimensionally, and I really appreciate that.
Commissioner, I had a couple comments real quick, then we'll wrap it up here. Senator Port brought up the number of units needed. Thank you, Senator Port, for bringing that up. We will differ on the number. 50,000 is kind of the number that I've been tracking. In our negotiations, we talked about we can't buy our way out of this problem. There just isn't enough money out there for government solutions to help with this unit issue that we have here in Minnesota. And that's why we were pushing some free market solutions in a lot of different aspects of housing. We don't need to get into all that today. But one of them was rent control. And what rent control does historically throughout the world, with the number of units being created. And, it's been in the media quite a bit about people pulling back from projects. From my real estate background, development background, I've seen a ton of housing units come up for sale in the last month. In the Twin Cities. I know it's had an effect. Commissioner, moving forward, I mean, where do you stand on this important issue, when we're looking for more units on the rent control? I know what happened during negotiations when we had that loophole bill in there to close that loophole. It wasn't supported. But seeing the reaction so far, I mean, where are you at, and where do you think you and your agency needs to be at?
The agency at this point in time doesn't have a position, and I think that it's something that we need to study. We need to get stakeholder input on. I mean, one of the ways that I have viewed the 2 local ballot initiatives is that it does create an opportunity to understand effects here in Minnesota if they move forward. I think there's a bigger conversation that you've outlined around where is it that the state is going to insert on housing policy issues, and where is there going to be local decision making. And I think that will be a broad conversation in the next legislative discussion. I feel like the agency's primary role is to do everything we can on production and preservation. And to do, the extra work that we're able to do because of our partnership with you on everything from homelessness to homeownership. So this is a new area for us, and not one where the agency has worked through all the stakeholder engagement and study that's needed to take a position on an issue like this.
But I do believe during negotiations you did oppose that provision along with the governor on the rent control.
Chair Dray, I'll have to go back to Dan and Ryan. I can barely remember what I had for dinner last night right now, but I can go back and take a look at that and follow up with you.
Okay, fair enough. And then while we were in this hearing, the email that was attached to the Zoom meeting, the person that sent me that just sent another email. Just real quick, we'll end it with this. Came at 10:45 this morning. Hi all, just an update from my side of things. My wife was almost in tears to see that our status was again bumped to requires applicant response. See case manager communication below. As we thought we had potential to be funded this week, I don't know what else to do as I only have 2 quarterly utility bills attached and I have no updated bill to provide. That's what they're asking for. He goes on to talk about how it's been months for him applying and getting the runaround. But I encourage all members, I'll forward this on to the rest of the committee. You know, this is affecting real people and not just landlords, members. This is a tenant. And we worked really hard on this bill to get people help. And that was the whole goal of our response, was to get people whole, not only the tenants and the landlords, and get things back to normal. So we need to do better. I thank you, Commissioner, and thank your staff for what they're doing. And all the words in the world don't mean anything to this young couple that is ready to get evicted. And have applied and tried to do the right things and went through the program and still can't get help. And it's hard on us senators, and I know all of us have had calls from tenants wanting help navigating this system that unfortunately, I know, Commissioner, you don't have control of. We're using a third-party vendor, but we need to do better, and I urge everyone to continue to communicate with the agency if they do have tenants or landlords that are having issues. Members, I do not have anything else. I could ramble all day on this. Commissioner, I really do appreciate your time. Members, any other final thoughts, comments? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone, and have a happy holiday season. Thank you.